Good afternoon. I am Saad Al-Aziz, the owner and head instructor of Semper Fortis Jiu-Jitsu here in San Antonio, Texas. And here to tackle this week's question of the week, which was, how do you determine if a technique will fit into your jiu-jitsu style and game, or whether to, just sort of let it go? How do you develop your game? And that's a question that everybody in jiu-jitsu struggles with. And in general, I would say, when you're a white belt, maybe even a blue belt, you don't really have a game. You're just sort of figuring it out. You're learning techniques, whether it's offensive techniques, escapes, or positions. And, it's starting to develop into a game, but basically you're just learning techniques. You'll start putting it together, but, at your early parts of your journey, I would say focus on just learning the technique the best you can from your instructor, and ask questions on the technique, and just realize that you're not at a point early in your journey to determine whether this is going to fit your body style, or whether this is going to fit your game, because you really don't have a game. It's going to come. Once you hit purple belt, you start to have a game. You start to know, hey, this is a technique that I can add to my game. This is something that I'll do, or this is something that my body can do, and this is something that I can't do. And so I probably won't, spend much time on a particular technique. In class, I will drill whatever the instructor is doing, if he's showing a technique, and I'll drill it, to the best of my abilities. But sometimes I can just know, through the drilling, it's this technique is probably not something that's going to add to my game. Whereas a white belt or a blue belt, you really don't know what your game is. It's something that you're going to discover throughout your journey. So don't feel I would never use this particular guard. So even, I'm not going to pay attention, or I'm not going to try to do it in class because it's not something that I would ever do. No, try to do it in class the best you can, and then try to drill it, and try to implement it into your roles. There was a great video years ago, you can probably still find it on YouTube, where Marcelo Garcia was just doing a training session where he was sparring with Eddie Bravo. And at the time, a lot of people from traditional jiu-jitsu schools were really struggling with Eddie Bravo's rubber guard. And what Marcelo was doing in the training session is he was sparring with Eddie, was he kept putting himself into Eddie's rubber guard, and then he would pass it. And then he would put himself back into the rubber guard to pass it again. And you could see that his whole goal of the training session was not to tap Eddie Bravo or to dominate Eddie Bravo. It was he wanted to perfect passing that rubber guard, and he wanted to try a couple different ways to do it, and that's what he did. And that was his goal in the training session. And if you do that and you take that approach, that's going to help your jiu-jitsu a lot, which is practice these techniques when you roll instead of just using your A game. And that's the temptation early on in jiu-jitsu, especially for white belts and blue belts, and even, purple belts, brown belts, and black belts make that mistake where when they spar, when they roll, it's here's my A game. And sometimes your A game is appropriate in a particular role. But let's say after class, you decide you're going to do 5 or 6, let's say 6 rounds of sparring, 6 5-minute rounds. Yes, maybe one of those rounds is against a brown belt or a black belt. Maybe one of those rounds is against a purple belt. And against them, let's say if you're a white belt or a blue belt, you're bringing your A game. But against the other white belts or the blue belts, instead of focusing on your A game, focus on hey, I want to do this butterfly sweep. And then try to make that sweep work. Or, I want to get to the mount, and I want to do this guard pass that's going to get me to the mount. And so the more I drill it, and the more I try it in a sparring session, the better I'm going to be at. So that's the struggle you're going to have, is to figure out, like, what is your game. And instead of deciding in advance, like, hey, this is not going to be a move that's going to work for me, try these moves out, and drill it, and add it to your game and sparring, and try to make that a move that that is yours. At some point you may hit a point where it's like, hey, this move's really not working for me, and I've been trying it, it's not working for me. And you can always go back to just asking your instructor or asking somebody else that does that move, hey, like, I'm doing this and I'm not making it work for me. What are you doing to make it work for you? Like, years ago, I wanted to add the hook sweep to my jiu-jitsu game. And it's something I've struggled with for years. Even though I'm a black belt, I'm not that good at doing the hook sweep or the butterfly sweep. And so it's a technique that I rarely try to do, just because, especially against other high-level people, because I'm just not that good at it. There's something I'm missing there, and I'm so the way I've worked on getting that better was like Carlos Machado. The Machado brothers are like legendary at doing the hook sweep, and Carlos Machado was in town doing a seminar here in San Antonio. So I went to the seminar. I was like, let me go and try to learn this from, arguably maybe the best ever at doing the hook sweep would be Carlos Machado or one of his brothers. Like, they're just phenomenal at doing it. And so sometimes that's the answer, is get with somebody that's really good at a technique and see if you can add that to your game. And like I said earlier, like, there's certain techniques that you're just not going to be able to do. Like, I'm at 53, I know that I'm not going to spin on my neck and bend over and do the berimbolo or the tornado guard. Like, I'm not doing that. So that's, I understand how to do it, I understand how to counter it, but I just realized that physically I'm not doing that move. There's a cool submission that I see every once in a while in a tournament where somebody from bottom side control, I think they call it the mousetrap. Like, they'll grab their leg and it's almost in a weird angle, but they choke out the person on top in side control. It's a phenomenal move, but every time you see the move done, it's done by somebody who's incredibly flexible and very athletic. It's not a move that, like, say, a 53-year-old guy like myself, who's had knee surgeries on both his right and his left knee and has back problems, is going to be able to do. Like, could I force it? Yeah, but then I would probably suffer for days because my knees and my back would hurt after doing it. So I can see that move and say, although I really like this mousetrap submission from bottom side control, I realize it's just not something I'm going to add. And although I admire the people that can spin on their neck and bend in half and do a tornado guard or a berimbolo, it's just not something that I'm going to be able to do. So it's a fine line on what when a technique is not going to work for you, and you just sort of have to feel it out. Like, is this technique not working for me because physically there's limitations that are keeping me from doing the technique? And that's going to happen sometimes. It's one of the reasons I don't do the rubber guard, because I got bad knees. I don't want to twist my knee in a weird position to hold you. And but it doesn't mean that it's not a good guard. It just means that for me, it's not something I want to do. So that's something you have to feel out, whether it's something that your body can't do, or are you not having success with this particular technique because there's a step you're not doing right. There's a detail you're not getting right. And so that's a balancing act that you have to figure out, whether is there a detail I'm not getting right, or is there a physical reason why I'm not going to be able to do the technique right. And you just sort of have to feel it out. So that's the answer for this week's question, is, try to perfect the technique, try to drill the technique, and if it's not working for you, try to ask somebody that's really good at the technique, if, like what adjustments you can make to make the technique work for you. Or just realizing that, sometimes there will be techniques that, your physical condition is just not going to allow you to do. And, I've come to that point in my journey as a black belt, as a 53-year-old man, that, hey, there's certain things that, since both my knees have been surgically repaired, like, this isn't a technique for me. Like, I'm not going to do this. But there's probably fewer techniques that fall into the category that this is not something that I can do, where a lot of techniques I could do, I just need to practice more, or I need to understand more details. And the more you practice, the better you're going to be. So I would recommend, depending on your belt level, depending on how much effort you've put into the technique, a lot of times the answer is it will fit into your game. You just need to drill it more. You need to drill it more. You need to experiment more. You need to try it out and not give up on the technique. And that's what I'm going to shoot for the answer to this week's question. So thank you for the question. And as always, if you got a question for next week, just write it down below, make a comment, or see me in class, and we'll go with that. All right. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Ciao.